So, we all know that lying awake at 2 o'clock in the morning staring at the ceiling is miserable in the moment. But what most people don't realize is what that broken sleep is actually doing to your body underneath the surface once you're past 50. Not just the grogginess the next day, not just the irritability, but your heart, your brain, your hormones, your blood sugar, all of it. And I know this is something so many of you watching this deal with because the messages I get about sleep after 50 are honestly some of the most common ones I receive. So what I want to talk about today is one incredibly simple habit, something that takes about 2 minutes that the research suggests can genuinely help you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer, especially if your sleep has changed in ways that feel completely out of your control since you hit your 50s. So in this video, I'm going to explain exactly why sleep falls apart after 50, what that's actually doing to your body long term, and then the specific 2-minute habit that can help turn it around. And all I ask is that if you find this useful, if you get some value out of it today, then please support what I'm doing here by giving the video a like and also subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. It really does make a massive difference and it allows me to keep making videos like this for you. So let's start with why sleep actually changes after 50 in the first place. Because I think a lot of people just assume it's simply age catching up with them, some vague, inevitable decline that nobody can do anything about. And that is only partly true. So somewhere around your late 40s and into your 50s, your body starts producing meaningfully less melatonin, which is the hormone that tells your brain it's time to wind down and go to sleep. At the same time, your core body temperature rhythm, which needs to drop in the evening to trigger sleepiness, becomes flatter and less pronounced than it was in your 30s and 40s. On top of that, for a lot of people going through perimenopause or menopause, dropping estrogen and progesterone directly disrupt the parts of the brain that regulate sleep, which is exactly why so many women in their 50s tell me they went from being fantastic sleepers their whole life to suddenly lying awake for hours with no obvious explanation. And for men, testosterone decline plays a smaller but still real role in sleep architecture as well. So it's not in your head and it's not simply that you're doing something wrong. Your actual biology is shifting underneath you. But here's the part that I think really matters, the part that most people never get told clearly. This isn't just about feeling tired the next day. Poor sleep after 50 sets off a chain reaction that touches almost every major system in your body, and understanding that chain reaction is exactly why this 2-minute habit matters so much. Let quote S start with your blood sugar, because the evidence here is about as solid as it gets in sleep medicine. And when you get a few nights of broken or shortened sleep in a row, your body becomes measurably more resistant to insulin. That is not a maybe. That is an established, repeatedly demonstrated fact. To understand why that matters, you need to understand what insulin actually does. Every time you eat carbohydrates, whether that's toast or pasta or a piece of fruit, those carbs break down into glucose, which is sugar circulating in your blood. Insulin is the hormone that acts like a key, unlocking your cells so that sugar can leave your bloodstream and get used for energy. But when your cells become resistant to insulin, which is exactly what happens after poor sleep, that sugar has nowhere to go. It builds up and lingers in your bloodstream. And elevated blood sugar is genuinely damaging because sugar is sticky. And over time, it injures the delicate lining of your blood vessels called the endothelium, which is the very first step on the road toward heart attacks, strokes, kidney damage, and type 2 diabetes. The reason poor sleep does this comes down to what sleep is actually for in the first place. Sleep is when your body repairs and resets, when your hormones rebalance, and when your stress response winds down for the night. When you don't get that properly, your body reads it as a threat, and it stays stuck in a low-level fight or flight state. That means your stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, stay elevated. Those hormones tell your liver to pour extra sugar into your bloodstream while simultaneously making your cells ignore insulin's signal. Poor sleep also drives up inflammation throughout your body and pushes your hunger hormones in exactly the wrong direction, which is why a bad night of sleep so often leaves you craving sugar and refined carbs the very next day at the exact moment your body is least equipped to handle them. Now let's talk about your brain, because this is the part that worries people the most once they understand it. During deep sleep, your brain runs something called the glymphatic system, essentially a cleaning cycle that flushes out metabolic waste products that build up during the day, including a protein called beta amyloid, which is one of the proteins strongly associated with Alzheimer's disease. When your deep sleep is chronically fragmented, which is extremely common after 50, that cleaning cycle doesn't run properly, and waste products that should be cleared out overnight are left to accumulate. Multiple long-term studies following adults over decades have found that people with consistently poor sleep in midlife show measurably higher rates of cognitive decline later on. This is not meant to frighten you. It's meant to explain why fixing sleep after 50 is not simply about feeling more rested tomorrow morning. It is genuinely one of the most protective things you can do for your long-term brain health. And then there's your heart. Poor sleep after 50 is associated with higher blood pressure, increased arterial stiffness, and elevated risk of heart disease, largely through the same stress hormone and inflammation pathways I just described. Your heart, quite literally, does not get the nightly recovery period it needs, night after night, and that accumulates over years, in a way that most people never connect back to something as simple as how well they slept. So, who does this matter most for? Well, obviously this matters for everybody, but it's particularly relevant for people whose sleep changed suddenly and dramatically once they crossed into their 50s. People dealing with hot flashes and night sweats disrupting them multiple times a night. People whose minds start racing the second their head hits the pillow with worries about aging parents or grown children or their own health, and people who simply find themselves waking up at 3 a.m. for no obvious reason and then lying there for an hour or two, unable to drift back off. If any of that sounds familiar, you are far from alone. Insomnia rates roughly double for women going through the menopausal transition compared to their premenopausal years, and a huge proportion of men in their 50s and 60s report meaningful changes in sleep quality as well, even without an obvious medical explanation. Telling someone in that position to simply relax more or go to bed earlier is honestly next to useless, because most people in this position are already doing everything they know how to do. What they need is something practical, something backed by real evidence, something that takes almost no time and fits into an already exhausted life. And that is exactly where this 2-minute habit comes in. So let me take you through where this actually comes from, because I want you to understand the reasoning, not just take my word for it. The habit is a specific breathing pattern, and I know breathing exercises get thrown around so casually in wellness content that it's easy to roll your eyes at this point. So stay with me, because the mechanism here is genuinely well established, not vague wellness talk. The technique is the extended exhale breathing pattern, and the most well-studied version of it is often called 4-7-8 breathing, developed and popularized by physicians studying the relationship between breath and the nervous system, though variations of extended exhale breathing appear across decades of respiratory and sleep research. Here's exactly how it works. You breathe in quietly through your nose for a count of 4 seconds. You then hold that breath gently for a count of 7 seconds. And then you exhale slowly and completely through your mouth for a count of 8 seconds, making a soft whooshing sound as the air leaves. You repeat that full cycle 4 times. 4 seconds in, 7 seconds held, 8 seconds out, 4 times through. Start to finish, that is somewhere around 2 minutes, sometimes even less. Now here's why this specific pattern works, and it comes down to your autonomic nervous system, the part of your nervous system operating entirely below conscious awareness that controls things like your heart rate, your digestion, and critically, whether your body feels like it's safe to sleep or whether it feels like it needs to stay alert. Your autonomic nervous system has 2 main branches. Your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight response, the system that gets activated by stress, by racing thoughts, by that wired but exhausted feeling so many people describe lying in bed at night. And your parasympathetic nervous system, often called rest and digest, which is the system that needs to be dominant for your body to actually fall asleep and stay asleep. Here, quote is the part that makes this breathing pattern so effective, specifically at bedtime. Your exhale is directly linked to parasympathetic activation through your vagus nerve, which runs from your brainstem down through your chest and abdomen. And it's one of the primary communication highways your body uses to shift out of fight or flight and into rest and recovery. When you extend your exhale to be meaningfully longer than your inhale, which is exactly what this 4-7-8 pattern does, you are directly and physically stimulating that vagus nerve and telling your nervous system, in a language your body understands far better than any conscious thought, that it is safe to power down. This isn't a metaphor. Research measuring heart rate variability, which is essentially a direct readout of how much your parasympathetic system is engaged, consistently shows that extended exhale breathing shifts your body measurably toward that rest and digest state within a matter of minutes, sometimes even within a single cycle. And this matters enormously for insomnia after 50 specifically, because so much of that particular kind of sleeplessness isn't about being physically tired. It's about your nervous system being stuck in an activated state, even though your body desperately wants rest. That racing mind the moment your head hits the pillow, that wired and tired feeling, that is your sympathetic nervous system refusing to stand down. And breathing is one of the only functions in your entire body that operates both automatically and under your direct conscious control at the same time, which makes it a genuinely unique lever you can pull to directly influence a nervous system state that otherwise feels completely outside your control. But the breathing technique isn't standing alone here either. There's a whole body of research behind slow, controlled breathing and sleep outcomes more broadly. A number of clinical studies looking at adults with insomnia have found that structured, slow breathing practices done before bed meaningfully reduced the time it took participants to fall asleep, commonly referred to as sleep latency, and also reduced the number of times they woke during the night. One frequently cited line of research on paced breathing found that participants using a structured, slow breathing pattern before bed fell asleep significantly faster than those using no technique at all, with some studies showing average reductions in time to fall asleep of several minutes to well over 10 minutes compared to a control group. And separate research specifically looking at breathing techniques and heart rate variability in perimenopausal and postmenopausal, women found that slow-paced breathing was associated with reduced frequency and intensity of hot flashes, which, if you're someone whose sleep is being wrecked by night sweats specifically, is a genuinely meaningful additional benefit layered right on top of the nervous system calming effect. The reason this particular habit works so well for people in their 50s and beyond, especially people juggling demanding jobs, aging parents, grown children who still need them, or their own health concerns keeping their mind busy at night, comes down to how ridiculously simple and low barrier it actually is. You don't need an app, you don't need a subscription, you don't need to carve out 20 minutes you don't have in your evening. You do it lying right there in bed in the dark in the 2 minutes right before you'd normally just lie there and let your thoughts spiral anyway. It requires no equipment, no light, no getting up, nothing that would further disrupt your body's readiness for sleep. Let me walk you through exactly how to do it properly, because the details genuinely matter here. Lie down in your normal sleeping position, whichever position you find most comfortable, and close your eyes. Place the tip of your tongue gently against the ridge of tissue right behind your top front teeth and keep it there through the entire exercise. This isn't strictly necessary for the calming effect, but it's part of the traditional technique, and it helps create a slight resistance on the exhale that many people find makes the whole pattern easier to control. Breathe in quietly and gently through your nose for a slow count of 4. Then hold that breath, staying relaxed rather than tense, for a count of 7. Then exhale completely through your mouth around your tongue for a count of 8, making a soft, audible whoosh sound as all the air leaves your lungs. That's 1 full cycle. Repeat it 3 more times, so 4 cycles total. Don't rush the counting, and don't worry if your exact count varies slightly from the exact ratio. The goal is a genuinely extended exhale relative to your inhale, not mathematical perfection. A word of caution here that I think is important and often left out of videos like this. If you have any respiratory conditions, if you feel lightheaded or dizzy while practicing this, or if breath holding feels genuinely uncomfortable rather than just unfamiliar, ease into it gradually, perhaps starting with a shorter hold, and speak to your doctor first, particularly if you have any underlying heart or lung conditions. Now, the honest truth is that the first time you try this, it might feel a little awkward, a little unnatural, maybe even slightly difficult to hold your breath for a full 7 seconds if you're not used to it. That's completely normal. Like almost anything involving your nervous system, this technique gets more effective with repeated practice because you are essentially training your body's stress response to recognize this specific pattern as a cue to relax. Many people report that within the first week of doing this nightly, it already starts to feel more natural and the calming effect starts to kick in noticeably faster. I also want to be completely upfront with you about something because I don't want to oversell this. This 2-minute breathing habit is not a substitute for actually addressing the underlying causes of insomnia after 50, whatever those happen to be for you specifically. It won't override significant sleep apnea, which is genuinely common in this age group and absolutely needs proper medical evaluation if you suspect it, particularly if you or a partner notice loud snoring, gasping, or pauses in breathing during sleep. It won't fully counteract severe hormonal disruption on its own, though it can meaningfully take the edge off. And it's not a replacement for addressing anxiety or depression if either of those is playing a significant role in your sleep difficulties, both of which become more common in this stage of life, and both of which deserve proper attention from your doctor rather than being managed with a breathing exercise alone. What this habit does is give your nervous system a reliable, evidence-backed off ramp from that wired, activated state that keeps so many people over 50 staring at the ceiling, and it does that in about 2 minutes at 0 cost, with essentially no downside. Because that's really the beauty of this particular recommendation. Even in the worst case scenario, where the research turns out to be somewhat overstated for your specific situation, you have lost nothing but 2 minutes lying in bed doing something calming instead of scrolling your phone or staring at the ceiling running through tomorrow's to-do list. And in the best case scenario, which is what the research genuinely does suggest for a meaningful number of people, you fall asleep measurably faster, wake up less during the night, and start chipping away at that blood sugar, brain health, and cardiovascular damage I described earlier simply by helping your body access the deep, uninterrupted sleep it's been struggling to get. I also want to mention something that ties directly back into that broader picture of sleep and metabolic health, because I think it's genuinely relevant here. Just like poor sleep drives insulin resistance and elevated blood sugar the way I described earlier, improving your sleep quality, even partially, tends to move things back in the right direction. Better sleep is associated with improved insulin sensitivity, lower inflammation, and more stable hunger hormones the very next day. So this isn't just about feeling less exhausted tomorrow morning, though that alone would be worth it. It's about interrupting a cycle that, left unaddressed, quietly compounds year after year in exactly the way I described with your heart, your brain, and your metabolism earlier in this video. Now let's talk practically about when and how to build this into your actual routine, because a habit only works if it's genuinely sustainable inside a real, busy, complicated life. The best time to do this is right as you get into bed, after you've already done whatever wind down routine works for you, whether that's brushing your teeth, dimming the lights, or simply turning off your phone. Do the 4 cycles lying in bed in the dark, eyes closed, right before you'd normally just lie there with your mind racing anyway. If you wake up in the middle of the night, which is extremely common in this age group and often the most frustrating part of insomnia after 50, you can absolutely repeat the same 4 cycles again right there in the dark rather than reaching for your phone or getting up, which almost always makes falling back asleep harder rather than easier. Some people find it helpful to pair this breathing pattern with one additional detail, keeping their bedroom on the cooler side, particularly if hot flashes or night sweats are part of what's disrupting your sleep. Since a cooler room supports the natural temperature drop your body needs to trigger and sustain sleep, and that drop tends to blunt somewhat after 50, the way I mentioned earlier. It's a small additional lever alongside the breathing itself, not a replacement for it. I want to share something a little more personal here too, because I think it matters. Sleep disruption isn't something that only affects shift workers or new parents, though those are groups I talk about often. It touches almost everyone eventually in different ways at different life stages for different reasons. And what I've found, both in the research and in the messages I get from people watching these videos, is that the people who struggle most with insomnia after 50 are very often the same people who spent decades being excellent, reliable sleepers, which makes the sudden change feel even more disorienting and frustrating. There is nothing wrong with you if your sleep has changed. Your biology has genuinely shifted, and the goal here isn't to fight that shift with willpower. It's to give your nervous system a genuine physiological tool to work with rather than against. So to recap everything we've covered today, sleep changes meaningfully after 50 due to declining melatonin production, a flattening body temperature rhythm, and for many people, significant hormonal shifts tied to menopause or, to a lesser degree, andropause. That disrupted sleep isn't just leaving you tired, it's driving genuine insulin resistance and elevated blood sugar through a stress hormone pathway, impairing your brain's overnight cleaning cycle in ways linked to long-term cognitive health, and placing measurable extra strain on your cardiovascular system through the same inflammatory and hormonal pathways. The 2-minute habit that can help counter some of this is extended exhale breathing, specifically the 4-7-8 pattern, breathing in for 4 seconds, holding for 7, and exhaling slowly and completely for 8, repeated for 4 full cycles right as you get into bed, and again if you wake during the night. This works by directly stimulating your vagus nerve and shifting your nervous system out of that fight or flight state and into the rest and recovery state your body needs to actually fall and stay asleep. And it's backed by real research on sleep latency, nighttime awakenings, and even hot flash frequency in women going through the menopausal transition. None of this means this breathing habit is some kind of miracle cure that erases decades of sleep disruption in one sitting, or that it can replace proper medical evaluation if you suspect something like sleep apnea, or if anxiety or depression is playing a significant role in what you're experiencing. It is genuinely one piece of a bigger picture, but it is a piece that costs you nothing, takes about 2 minutes, requires no equipment, and has a real, measurable physiological mechanism behind it rather than being vague wellness advice with nothing underneath it. So if you are someone who has found yourself lying awake since your 50s hit, wondering what happened to the sleeper you used to be, I genuinely encourage you to try this tonight. Not next week, not once you've researched every other possible solution. Tonight, right when you get into bed. 4 seconds in through your nose, hold for 7, exhale slowly for 8, 4 times through. It costs you 2 minutes, and there is essentially nothing to lose. You cannot always control the hormonal and biological shifts happening in your body after 50, but you absolutely can give your nervous system a genuine, evidence-backed way to stand down each night. And that is something entirely within your control, starting tonight.